Okay, fine guys. So what you have done in this session called Introduction to Gmat Errors. So what you have done in this particular session is that, or what we have tried to achieve in this particular session is, given that we know what are the different types of errors, we try to identify those errors in sentences which are similar to Gmat or Gmat sentences. Okay, that's what we have done. We looked at the different types of errors in Introduction to Errors. In Introduction to Gmat Errors, what we did was, we looked at how these concepts are tested in Gmat-like sentences or sentences which are similar to Gmat sentences. That's what we have done till now. Okay, and now next what you're going to do is, you're going to solve all the official guide questions. Okay, please solve the official guide 13th edition and 12th edition questions. The instructions are there in that particular section. Now, there's one small note which I want to leave, or I want to discuss one important concept before we move on to official guide questions. See, it's very, very important that you follow a structure while you answer the questions, guys. Okay, so it's very, very important that you follow a structure while answering this question. Don't try to answer the questions randomly. So let me give you the structure or the algorithm for solving these questions. Okay, I'll give you the algorithm or structure for solving this question. So first, see, step one, what you should do is, you need to identify the verb in the sentence, guys. Please identify the verb in the sentence. That's very, very important, because in and around the verb, I have seen 50% of the errors. In and around the verb, you'll have 50% of the errors. So first, identify what is the verb in the sentence. Immediately next, what you do is check for subject-verb agreement. Okay, that is first thing. Check for subject-verb agreement. Second, what you'll do is you'll check for verb tense errors and all. Then you'll check for verb mood errors, subjunctive mood or not. Then what you'll do is you'll check for verb idiomatic errors. Immediately check for idiomatic errors. These are 4 types of errors you'll immediately check. So moment I spot the verb, I will check for subject-verb agreement. How do you know what is the subject of a sentence? Very simple. Ask the question what or who to the verb. Whichever noun answers that question will be the subject of the sentence. Okay, so you check for subject-verb agreement errors, tense errors, mood errors, idiomatic errors. That's what you'll check immediately. Once it passes through all these tests, then what you do is check for subject pronoun agreement errors. Please check for subject pronoun agreement errors, because again we see these pronoun errors. Then once the question passes through all these tests, check for all your error indicators. Immediately check for all the error indicators. Like for example, you see a comma, immediately you'll check for run-on errors. Okay, you'll check for run-on errors, or you're going to check for modifier errors. Okay, when you see the word comma which, moment you see the word comma which, what will you check for? Immediately you're going to check for relative pronoun reference error. Okay, you'll immediately check for relative pronoun reference error. Okay, moment you see comma which, then moment you see words like as dot dot as, so dot dot as, like, okay, unlike, okay, in contrast. So moment you see these words in the sentence, right? Moment you see these indicators of those words in the sentence, immediately you'll check for comparison errors. Okay, and moment you see a coordinating conjunction, okay, moment you see a coordinating, okay, conjunction, what should you do? You should immediately check for parallelism error, okay, or ellipsis error. Immediately you'll check for parallelism error or ellipsis error. Okay, and see, there are 3 other types of errors. No, one is diction error. It's very difficult to identify. That's why, see, there is a miscellaneous topic which I've given you guys. Just go through that. There I've given all these interesting topics which get discussed in diction errors. Okay, all this something which I've not covered in my grammar basics part 1, part 2, part 3 or introduction to errors. It's there under the section called as miscellaneous topics. Go through that, because that is where I've primarily covered all these diction errors. Like you use such as for examples. Okay, like is always used for comparing nouns or phrases. We always use it for comparing nouns or phrases. Okay, whereas as is always used for comparing actions. This is something which we have learned. Okay, this is what is diction errors. See, style errors are very difficult to identify, or there are no set rules for identifying style errors, guys. The one thing which I've discussed is converting verb into a noun, which is completely wrong. But otherwise, typically we'll say that they are very verbose. Okay, and grammatical constructions we know. Okay, grammatical constructions, these are basically your run-on errors. These are fundamentally your run-on errors or verb is missing. Okay, so this is a methodology which I want you to solve, which I want you to use when you solve questions. Okay, so first what you do is, so let's put like this. So first, right, so first always, so just going through it once again. So please moment you always try to identify the verb in the sentence. That's very, very important. Identify the verb in the sentence. Immediately check for subject verb agreement. How do you identify the subject in the sentence? Ask the question who or what. Whichever noun answers that question will be the subject of the sentence. Then check immediately for tense errors, check for mood errors, check for idiomatic errors. So this is one set. Then after that is done, check immediately for subject pronoun agreement errors. Okay, there's one more error which you can check on. Okay, this is what we call as this is what we call as determiner, okay, noun agreement errors. I called this determiner noun agreement errors comes under a broad category called as diction errors. See, for example, the question which we discussed, right? Let's say this potential side effects question, we discussed that. So much was referring to potential side effects. If you remember this, much was referring to potential side effects. So much, okay, was referring to potential side effects. We know that is definitely wrong because side effects is plural countable. Much cannot be used with countable nouns. Similarly, number of changes, we know, or numbers, instead of number it was amount, right? So amount of changes, that's a question which we discussed, right? If you look at this, changes is basically countable, so you can't use amount with countable nouns. So these are basically what we call as determiner noun agreement errors. These are basically called as determiner noun agreements. They can come along with subject or object, but there will be this determiner noun agreement error also. Okay, so this will help you to find out predominantly the errors. So look at this, look at it, no? See, around the verb we have subject verb agreement, tense error, mood errors, idiomatic errors, subject pronoun agreement errors, determiner noun agreement errors. Almost 50-60% of the errors are in and around the verb. That's why it's important to identify the verb in a sentence. If you do that, you should be able to spot the error most of the times. Now, if you're not able to find, or let's put like this, before you start, so ideally what you do is you start by identifying the verb in the sentence, but when in the process of identifying the verb in the sentence, please understand, in the process of identifying the verb in the sentence, if you find any of these error indicators, immediately check for that particular error. Okay, so in the process, let's put like this, step 1 is always to identify the verb in the sentence, but in the process, okay, of identifying, in the process of identifying the verb, okay, if you happen to find any of these error indicators, immediately check for certain errors. For example, what are those error indicators? Moment you see a comma, check for run-on error or modified error. Moment you see comma which, immediately check for relative pronoun reference error, standard mistake. Okay, next is you see words like as dot dot as, so dot dot as, like, unlike, etc. Check for comparison errors. Okay, and moment you see a coordinating conjunction, immediately check for parallelism error and ellipsis error. Okay, now there's one more error. It's very interesting. By the way, see, you'll solve OG questions and I'll be discussing this methodology there also. So, very interesting error is, see, you'll always check for subject verb agreement. Okay, that is, moment you identify the verb in a sentence, see, moment you identify the verb in the sentence, you will check for the subject and you will always check for subject verb agreement. What do you mean by subject verb agreement? Verb is singular, subject is singular. Verb is plural, okay, subject should also be plural. This is one error. This is basically you're checking in terms of number. This is what we call as number agreement. That's perfectly fine. You should always check whether the number agrees or not. But the second type of error which you will check, which is very, very important, the second type of error which you will check is whether the verb has the correct logical subject or not. It has got the correct logical subject or not. That is something which you will always check. That's very, very important. Okay, so one is you check whether subject is singular, verb is singular, subject is plural, verb is plural. But the other thing you will immediately check for is that whether the subject is the right subject for that verb or not, or whether the verb has the right logical subject or not. That's a mistake I've seen quite often. Okay, where the subject is, the verb should refer to some other subject or some other noun, but it is wrongly referring to the subject. So the check you will do is, please check whether the verb has the right logical subject or not, right or correct logical subject. That's very, very important. Similarly, in terms of subject, okay, pronoun agreement, okay, or the noun pronoun agreement. So if I look at noun pronoun agreement, again, the concept we should check is, again, if the noun is singular, the pronoun has to be singular. Okay, if the noun is plural, the pronoun should also be plural. So this is again what we call as number agreement. Fair enough. This is clearly a number agreement. Okay, noun is singular, pronoun is singular, noun is plural, pronoun is also plural. This is number agreement. But the other thing which you have to check is, does the pronoun have the right or correct logical reference. Okay, is the pronoun logically referring to the noun or not? Is it logically referring, okay, to the correct noun or not? That's very, very important. So what will happen is, see, you'll have the subject, for example, I think the question which we discussed, right? Teacher's appointment. So if I look at one of the questions which we discussed. So look at this particular question. This we discussed, I think, in the category called as pronoun errors. Okay, so if you look at this, so it says teacher appointments in government schools are not solely given based on their academic records. Okay, now there was clearly plural. Teacher appointments is also plural. Teacher appointments is plural. There is also plural. So the number agreed very well. But look at this, no, based on their academic records. How can teacher appointments have academic records? Teacher appointments cannot have academic records, right? Teachers will have academic records. So what is happening is the noun and the pronoun agree. They agree in terms of number. They clearly agree in terms of number, but logically they don't agree with each other. Okay, they logically don't agree with each other. That's very, very important. So you should check whether the noun agrees with the pronoun logically. That's very, very important. It is very important to check whether the noun agrees with the pronoun logically or not. That's one more check we will do. So whenever you do subject, verb, agreement, you should check for two things. One, whether it agrees in number, that is point number one. Second, you should check whether it agrees logically or not. Number agreement is different, logical agreement is different. Similarly, when you check for noun, pronoun agreement, please check whether they agree in terms of number. But the second thing you will also check is in terms of logic, whether it logically aligns or not. The noun pronoun agreement should happen in terms of number and also in terms of logic. So logically they should also agree with each other. And the last step is, if you have a pronoun, sometimes it will have, sometimes the reference is wrong. Okay, sometimes the reference is wrong. Okay, or it will have no reference at all. The pronoun will not have a reference. Okay, or we have used the wrong pronoun. Okay, or we have used the wrong pronoun. So reference, sometimes the reference is completely wrong. There is no reference at all, or we have used the wrong pronoun. For example, to replace action, please understand, to replace action, we will always say do so. Okay, do so is always used for replacing action, whereas do it is not used for replacing action. Here we have the wrong pronoun being used. Sometimes the reference is wrong, there is no reference at all those mistakes. Okay, so this is a logic which you should follow, guys. As long as you follow the logic, it's perfectly fine. Identify the verb, that's step number one. When you identify the verb, okay, please check immediately for subject verb agreement. That's very, very important. Along with it, check whether the idiom is correct. Because in and around the verb, you'll have the idiomatic errors, right? Then you should check whether the tense is correct, whether the mood is correct. Standard. Okay, you'll check whether the tense, mood, idiom is perfectly fine. And yeah, these are the four types of error. And immediately you check for subject, right? And you should also check subject verb agreement in terms of number, in terms of logic. You check subject verb agreement in terms of number and logic. Okay, in terms of subject, what do? You'll check two types of errors. One is basically the subject. We'll check whether there is subject pronoun agreement or not. We check whether the subject agrees with the pronoun. Again, in terms of number, okay, and in terms of logic. Whether the subject and the verb or pronoun agree in terms of number and logic. Similarly, the subject and the determiner should also agree. The subject and determiner should also agree. Right. So this is a standard set of things. So very simple. Okay. Sort of a flow chart. Verb, immediately subject verb agreement, number and logic is correct or not. Then in terms of verb, whether it is idiomatically correct, tense is correct, mood is correct. Then you look at the subject. Okay. I look at subject pronoun agreement, number is correct, logically it's correct or not. Then we look at subject determiner agreement. While I'm searching for the number, you'll also search for those key error indicators. No. You'll also search for key error indicators. Okay, before that, again, in terms of pronoun, you'll also check whether there is the reference is right or wrong, whether there is no reference, okay, or is it the wrong pronoun which is being used. Okay, no reference, okay, whether the reference is right or wrong, okay, or whether you use the wrong pronoun itself. It's a standard thing. Next, while checking when you're trying to identify the pronoun, if you find some error indicators, immediately you'll check for those errors. Comma means run on. Comma basically means run on errors or modifier errors. That's standard thing. Okay, moment you see comma widths, immediately you'll check for relative pronoun reference error. Okay, moment you see any of those comparison words, as, as, okay, like, okay, unlike, okay, in contrast, etc. and all, immediately check for comparison errors. Okay, comparison errors, please follow the methodology which we discussed. That's very, very important. What is the methodology we discussed? Step 0. First, okay, what are the steps? Step 1 is identify what is being compared. Identify what is really being compared. That's step 1. What is step 2? Step 2 is write the most elaborate answer, guys. Most descriptive answer. Don't use any pronoun at all. Write the most descriptive answer or most elaborate answer. Then you replace pronouns. Then you replace nouns, okay, with pronouns. Okay, replace nouns with pronouns. That's very, very important. So that's how you do comparison error. Again, going back to error indicators. Okay, moment you see coordinating conjunction. See, please understand, moment you see a coordinating conjunction, what will you do? You'll immediately check for parallelism error, okay, or ellipsis error. This is standard methodology which you will follow, guys. If you follow this methodology, you're done. That's how I've solved all the OG questions. Please solve the OG questions and then look at the video solutions. Wherever your answer goes wrong or you're not very comfortable with the right answer choice, you chose an answer choice because you guessed it. Fair enough. Use a video solution because that has got there I've tried to explain the answers using the methodology which we have discussed till now. Whatever concepts, whatever methodologies I've taught you, I've used that to explain those questions. Okay. And lastly, in terms of the other errors, that is diction. So if you look at diction, style and grammatical construction, diction is the wrong usage of words, guys, like such as, like, etc. They keep making mistakes using in these words. For that, look at the miscellaneous notes which I've given. That will really help you a lot. The miscellaneous notes has all these diction errors, standard errors which they make. Style is okay, usually it is very verbose or awkward structure, guys. You should be able to identify that. One common mistake they do is converting verb into a noun, and grammatical construction is typically your run-on errors or the verb is missing, etc. and all. Right. So I wanted to go to that miscellaneous topics where I cover all these diction errors and other errors. And please also go to the idiom list before you start solving the OG question, guys. Thank you. Please follow this particular please follow this algorithmic approach. You should be able to get the answer right. If you randomly start answering the questions, it's going to be difficult. You might be lucky enough to get the answers right in OG questions, but in the question bank or hard questions, you will struggle, guys.